Greetings and welcome to my new trailer if you're watching on YouTube. And if listening on SoundCloud or any other podcasting hosting site, this is the audio version of a new trailer for my YouTube channel. But please continue to listen. It's a brand new message, but obviously not a new enterprise. I've had this podcast a while now. It is just that life circumstances have had me less than fully engaged with the podcast these last few months. And during that time away, I began to rethink the purpose, focus, and direction of this channel/podcast. I reread my default description on YouTube, and I didn't like it. To me, it read like the standard curriculum vitae polished up by a marketing guru. And being written in third person, yikes, that felt really cheesy. The genesis of this podcast came about because of a long-established habit I've had, which has both good and bad aspects to it. The good part, I have been an inveterate note-taker for decades, be they simple ideas, song lyrics, speeches, quotations, stories, movie dialogue, poems, anything that educated me, touched me, moved me, or just made me wonder, I would capture by writing it down. And now the bad aspect. I would usually write on napkins, backs of envelopes, blank pages in books, and the reverse side of corporate memos. I ignored the sound advice of many sages who said, all serious people keep a journal. My immature mind thought, a journal. That sounds too much like a high school diary. No thanks. So all these notes I've captured over the years were shoved in file folders, and going through them one day, I finally began codifying them. After a very short time, I thought, this is crazy and monotonous. I am not going to rewrite all these notes. But then again, I didn't want to waste them either. I thought, there are a lot of people that might benefit from these notes. So I got the idea. Rather than rewrite them, I'll capture them by way of audio. Hence, the birth of this podcast. And with a large portion of my notes coming from speeches or speech classes, I originally thought I would design the podcast for ambitious, upwardly mobile people in the business and entrepreneurial worlds looking to improve their public speaking skills. And while this podcast is still largely about public speaking, I acknowledge that it does stray into different subjects now and then. And it will continue to do so. You see, I never intended for this channel/podcast to be a commercial enterprise. That was never my objective. So I'll continue to ignore the expert advice to keep my subject matter narrow, tight, and deep. This channel is not about one thing. While the chief focus may be public speaking, I will continue to share other valuable life lessons that I've learned over these last 6 decades, in hopes that it will benefit, if only in a small way, members of those generations coming up behind me. Emerson wrote long ago that it is natural and beautiful that youth should inquire and maturity should teach. I don't share too many personal stories, but I want to share this one, because it's central to the soul and identity of my podcast. For those that don't know, I started in the grocery business at 15 years old as a bag boy and made it all the way to vice president. Now, mind you, that is not that uncommon in the grocery business. And like most people, my work journey wasn't always smooth, in that I stalled out many times on the way up. What might make my story a bit unique, however, is that it was a company psychologist that triggered an awakening in me. Being the ever-competitive and ambitious fellow that I am, I was promoted from bag boy through the ranks to assistant store manager in a relatively short period of time. Then I became maniacally focused on getting promoted to store manager. Back in those days, a store manager was the only job in the store that was not in the union, and a job that paid considerably more money than did the union jobs. But before one could get promoted to store manager, they had to see the company psychologist and undergo a battery of intellectual and psychological tests. And the only way one could get an appointment with the esteemed psychologist was to be recommended for promotion by the district manager or the respective vice president. The recommendations came easy for me. The test did not. I tested with this psychologist 3 different times in a period of a year and a half. Each time he recommended that I not be promoted. In his words, I was a high risk for failure. After I was told for the 3rd time that he, quote, held me back, unquote, I was furious and devastated and was tempted to throw a Molotov cocktail through his office window. But it's funny how life works out. Just about that time, when I gave up on ever becoming a store manager and resigned myself to the fact that I'd be in the union forever, I responded to a free 30-day trial for an audio cassette program by Earl Nightingale called Lead the Field. The program inspired me to be sure, but it also made me realize how underdeveloped I was and that the psychologist was right. So Earl's message got me back to school, for a while anyway, but more importantly, it started me on a lifelong journey of personal development. In the ensuing years, the senior vice president of operations overrode our psychologist friend and promoted me to store manager. 5 years later, I was recommended for a promotion to a position in the main office, which required, you guessed it, another visit to the psychologist. After the battery of tests and during the interview portion, the company psychologist, John Martin was his name, said to me, "What the hell happened to you?" I told him about Earl Nightingale. I was promoted a few weeks later. So this channel is not just for aspiring public speakers, it's for all those who can benefit from what I've learned on a scrappy journey. I hope you'll stay with me on this Odyssey until